Hey, what's going on, guys? I want to talk about biblical apologetics in this video, and I want to talk about it strictly from like a scriptural standpoint. Sometimes when we think about the world of apologetics, immediately our mind goes to, at least my mind does, goes to history, science, and things of that nature, philosophy, and those are all valid ways to defend the faith. Those are all biblical ways to defend the faith. But there is a way that is present in the Old and New Testament that we don't use enough in our world today. And that method is basically joining the conversation that goes on in people's heads, their minds, and their hearts, the cultural conversation. The beliefs of the culture that people internalize, joining that conversation and then giving them and then providing the biblical solution. So, for example, in the Old Testament time period, idol worship was out of control. Just about every pagan nation around Israel engaged in worship of false gods. They engaged in idolatry. That was just the culture. That was what their day-to-day life revolved around. That was on their mind constantly, was offering sacrifices to these idols, even singing hymns to these false gods. And that really shaped their identity. Well, when you see the way that the Bible and the prophets talk about idols, they join the conversation, but also they are not always overly politically correct. Sometimes they just say that the belief is dumb. It doesn't make any rational sense. And for example, Isaiah 44:9, starting in verse 9, it says, "How foolish are those who manufacture idols. These prized objects are really worthless. The people who worship idols don't know this, so they are all put to shame. Who but a fool would make his own God, an idol that cannot help him one bit?" Now, friends, think about the power of those statements and those questions. So you have a culture that Isaiah and the children of Israel would have been around constantly, that is given over to idol worship. In fact, God's people had given themselves over to idol worship as well. That's why eventually they go into captivity. But Isaiah joins the conversation. People are worshiping idols. And he asks very, very simple question. Why would you make an idol? Why would you make an idol with your own hands and then worship it? You are the one making the idol, but clearly the idol is lower than you because you have to make it. And yet you're worshiping it. It doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense. He says in verse 11, "All who worship idols will be disgraced along with these craftsmen, mere humans who claim they can make a god. They may all stand together, but they will stand in terror and shame." Verse 12, "The blacksmith stands at his forge and makes a sharp tool, pounding and shaping it with all his might. His work makes him hungry and weak. It makes him thirsty and faint. Then the woodcarver measures the block of wood and draws a pattern on it. He works with chisel and plane and carves it into a human figure. He gives it human beauty and then puts it in a little shrine. He cuts down the cedars. He selects the cypress and the oak. He plants the pine in the forest to be nourished by the rain." So these idol worshipers, these blacksmiths, are going through all this turmoil. They're burning their energy. They're hungry. They're thirsty. They're wearied from making all these idols in the likeness of a human. But how does that make any sense? You're giving your energy to something that you make, and then you're worshiping it, even though you're the one who made it. So you're greater than the idol. Doesn't make any sense. He says, in verse 17 through 18, then he takes what's left and makes his God a carved idol. He falls in front of it, worshiping and praying to it. Rescue me, he says, you are my God. Such stupidity and ignorance. Their eyes are closed and they cannot see. Their minds are shut and they cannot think. So Isaiah doesn't mince any words. And look at how he joins that conversation. He's giving you kind of like a blow by blow of what these blacksmiths and these idol makers will be doing. They're wearied. They're giving themselves over to this task, and they think it's for this grandiose purpose, and they think it's for this great thing that they are doing. But it is a pointless activity, and it's blasphemous to Yahweh, the true God. It doesn't make any sense. Isaiah asked the question at the end of verse 19, should I bow down to worship a piece of wood? How does that make any sense at all? It makes no rational sense. So this is just one example, but you'll see many examples of the prophets joining the conversation going on around them in people's heads and people's minds in the culture, and they will join it. They will call it for what it is. It's ignorant. It's not intelligent. Then they will give the biblical solution. You even see Elijah, when he faces off against the 450 prophets of Baal, he actually kind of pokes fun at the idol worshiping prophets whose false god Baal would not answer them. He actually kind of pokes fun at them. And I would suggest that we have biblical examples of that. There is a time and a place. I'm not encouraging anybody to be mean-spirited, but we have a pattern laid out for how we can more effectively defend the faith and more effectively take control of the narrative in society that is going on in people's head. Because I'm here to tell you right now, at the narrative that is being propagated in the media, the narrative that is being propagated on social media and the institutions and the universities, just everywhere, that affects people's minds and hearts, and it makes them less receptive to the gospel. I'm only 29 years old, but we're living in a world that seems very hostile to God. And I don't think that's just opinion or Christian complaining, Christian complaining, because you saw what they did at the Olympics. It's a global massive event. Nations around the world are present. Nations around the world are watching. And they do a blasphemous event to make fun of the Lord's Supper, and they pose Jesus as something he's not. I'm not even going to deface the name of the Son of God by saying what they did to Jesus in that blasphemous, barbaric, disgusting display. Just debauchery, right? So there is an open hostility to God. The God of the Bible specifically. There is an open hostility to the Son of God, right? And as Christians, God says he's given us divine weapons, 2 Corinthians 10, 3-6, to destroy strongholds and every lofty thing that raises itself against the knowledge of God. And you think about going to battle, or if you think about going to war, you're not going to use the same tactic every time with the same people to try to get an advantage, to try to get a victory. You do that, you're dead. You do that in a boxing match. If you go out and you're fighting a top level competitor and all you do is the same sequence of punches all the time, that competitor is going to easily download that information, pick you apart, and he's going to pick you apart and probably knock you out, right? So there's different methods that we see biblically to defend the faith. And you'll even see this with Jesus. Jesus would oftentimes use questions. Matthew chapter 22 is a great example of this towards the end of that chapter, where they're trying to corner Jesus, and Jesus, he knows that they have this high reverence for David, King David, and Jesus simply asks them about himself. So I don't misquote this passage. I'm going to go there real quick on my laptop. Just bear with me for a second, guys. Just bear with me for one moment. because I think this is another powerful example of biblical apologetics that Jesus himself lays out for us to emulate and to try to follow and to utilize when the time is right and when the situation is right. So Matthew 22:41-45. Now while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them a question, saying, "What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he?" They said to him, "The son of David." He said to them, "How is it that David and the Spirit calls him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet? If then David calls him Lord, how is he his son?" And no one was able to answer him a word, nor from that day that anyone dared to ask him any more questions. Jesus was well aware that his audience, the Pharisees, they had an extremely high reverence for David, but they did not have any high reverence for the Son of God. So Jesus strategically asks them questions to expose their hypocrisy and to expose their inconsistency. He did it so eloquently and so magnificently to the point that nobody even asked him any more questions. Nobody even answered his questions. And friends, that is the example, one of the many examples that are laid out for us when it comes to biblical apologetics. You know, our chief aim should not be being nice and being politically correct. Our chief aim should be to try to help people think biblically, to try to help to plant a seed. If you're talking to an honest heart, and you defend the faith very well, and you plant a seed of doubt in their mind that maybe their current lifestyle or their current way of thinking is not in line with truth and reality, then that's a win. You know, God is the one who causes the increase. It's just our responsibility to plant that seed. So I know it's been kind of, you know, more raw type of video, guys, but I hope you like this content. I'm going to try to do more videos like this. Until next time, much love. Peace.